Mailbag Friday. What if the college football playoff used a system to pick its teams like the NCAA? Yikes. That's next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase.
All right. Good morning, everybody. It's Friday. Connor Happer here from 1620 The Zone. Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. It's a Mailbag Friday here in late January with a busy weekend ahead, I assume, for both of us. I'm fired up for Sunday when the Nebraska women's basketball team has their packed PBA game against top 15 Ohio State. They've been rolling lately.
We got the UConn women in eastern Nebraska also this weekend playing in downtown Omaha. I know this is a Nebraska podcast, but hey, it's the UConn women. Come on, you got to appreciate that.
It's the State of Nebraska podcast, right? I guess, yeah.
It is in January when there's not much going on with Husker football. That's for sure. Championship Sunday in the NFL. I thought when you were talking about Sunday, you were headed in that direction.
Yeah, well, that's gonna be good as well. Will we get a Chiefs Eagles rematch or some other combination? Will Josh Allen get over the hump? Will Jaden Daniels finish off one of the best rookie seasons anybody's ever seen?
The Omaha League One volleyball team debuts at home on Friday and Saturday night at the arena formerly known as Ralston Arena in the Ralston area. You got ex-Husker Olympians all over the court, maybe some future Olympians like Lexi Rodriguez. I'm interested to see how that thing draws the fans out after the Supernovas pulled in 25,000 to their first two matches.
There you go. All right, so it's a pretty busy weekend here, but football, as we have mentioned, is taking a little bit of a backseat, or Husker football has anyway. But that doesn't stop you guys from thinking about it, which is what I love. And so let's get to our mailbag questions, many of which are about Nebraska football, of course. Here is Tom to start things off. Tom is wondering, I'm sure everyone is the fullback dead at Nebraska?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think it's a question that's worth asking. Some roster updates that Nebraska unveiled late this week. The spring semester, as we know, began on Tuesday, so you have 35 new players who were added, many of whom are in classes. All of the transfers are here and in classes for the spring, and then a good chunk of the 20 freshmen are also here. And around that time, Nebraska will traditionally update its roster to be the 2025 roster on Huskers.com. And something that I noticed when I believe the updated roster showed up on Thursday, and you do not see any fullbacks. So Barrett Liebentritt was around in 24. He did go through senior day, but had eligibility remaining. So there was some question about whether he would be back with the Huskers. There is no longer any question because he's not listed on the roster. And then Trevor Ruth is another player who had eligibility remaining. He's also no longer listed on the roster. So only running backs. You could have a fullback type in that running back group, but Nebraska's not designating a fullback in the Dana Holgorsen offense moving forward.
Yeah, you could put a guy like Ty Robinson back there in lead block, right? Or you could put a tight end back there in lead block if you're on the goal line and you feel like you need to plow out some room for your running back to jump over everybody or whatever it might be. But yeah, I think I've reconciled with this long ago. The fullback is indeed dead. There's no reason for Nebraska to carry a fullback on its roster anymore.
Who's the most likely fullback who plays, which would be making it a secondary position like Robinson played fullback as we saw and remember, especially in the bowl game on the game clinching play. Who's the most likely player to slide over and play a fullback spot on the 25 roster?
Well, you got Luke Lindenmeyer, who know you probably want out there on the line of scrimmage.
I was thinking that.
How about Janiron Bonner? He's done it.
He's done it. He's done it. How about Heinrich Harburg?
There you go. Swiss Army knife Heinrich.
So maybe a defensive lineman? No? You think like Williams Nwaneri could play fullback?
I don't think no. I don't think that would be a good idea for anybody. I don't know. Maybe there's a couple, but like you said, dude, there's you got some options there if you really want to clear out some space and throw the battering ram back there. It's sad. I know people are nostalgic about it, but it's really going to be okay.
Nebraska has a couple running backs. Isaac Dickey in particular, who's a redshirt freshman walk-on who fashions himself as a fullback and like believes himself to be like the last standing fullback, I think, in football. There are some at other levels of the game. I think Army and Navy and even some NFL teams have fullbacks, but no, Dickey's very proud of his fullback heritage, and he's just listed as a running back. So I think you're going to see some lead blockers. Like there are situations, whether it's on the goal line, short yardage, whatever, where Holgerson is going to get creative and have somebody in there between the QB and the running back or alongside in a shotgun set and H-back, fullback, whatever it is. But sorry to Tom Rathman and all of the others, the Macavickas who hold the flag at that position. I think those days, maybe they'll come back someday, but for now, the traditional fullback is gone from Nebraska.
All right, here's Doug on Twitter. Doug has a very interesting question. He says, I know this reeks of the BCS, but what if we use something like the NSAA uses, the Nebraska School Activities Association uses to determine points when choosing the top teams for the college football playoff? It takes strength of record into consideration, more points for beating better teams. Thoughts? So yes, they have they call it a wild card points system. It is horrendously flawed. So you wouldn't you wouldn't take that exact system over there. No, Doug. No, this is a bad idea. This is a bad idea.
I'm glad that you phrased it like that, because every year, and this happens in football and in basketball, like you can see things with your eyes, and then you can see a different story when you look at the NSAA wildcard system. It gets you a playoff bracket, I guess, is about the best thing that I can say about it. And it doesn't require a selection committee. So I'm going to take Doug's email, his suggestion, to just kind of mean that. Is there a way that we could do this to take the selection committee out of the process? And I do like that idea, or at least to remove some of the sway, the authority of the selection committee. We talked about a system, I think it was last week in the mailbag, where it was basically just a set number of automatic berths per conference. And maybe at the end of it, you'd have one or two wild cards. I'm honestly like leaning in the direction of supporting a system like that, where you have 4 Big Ten teams, 4 SEC teams, a certain amount from the other power conferences, 1 from a group of 5, and like 1 wild card. Or if you were to expand the playoff, 3 wild cards. So I like that, which, like, if you want to stretch the meaning of what Doug is asking here, I think he's just asking, I hope he's just asking, can we get away from these people who sit in a room and come on TV every Tuesday night and talk themselves in circles?
I'll say this. I really like the idea that you earn your bye. You earn the top 4 seeds in the playoff, right? How do you get that? You win your conference championship and you be one of the highest 4 teams ranked in that won a conference title, right? Like I think that's a good thing. I think that's it didn't necessarily work out this year because the teams that were left on the outside, that did not win their conference titles, ended up being better generally than the teams that actually won the conference titles. But for years, I think we've been trying to find some sort of some sort of like objectivity to selecting the playoff field, right? Like we have a spot that is earmarked for a blank champion. And I think that's a good thing. Like I like that. I don't need the whole field to be that way like the NFL is. I don't want the whole field to be subjective where you're just ranking the teams like it used to be, because that's what we tried to get away from, and that's why we expanded the playoff in the first place. I once again say that, just let's let this play out for a few years. Let's see what happens. I don't want to get into the habit of change the college football playoff field every year, every other year, every 5 years, every 10 years even. I mean,
Right.
it's just not like, I don't know. It just doesn't feel like it'd be advantageous for the sport. So I don't know. Leave it. That's what I say.
The basketball tournament has seemed to work by finding a sweet spot at 64 or 68 teams. The college baseball tournament seems to have worked by avoiding what would be seen as constant change, adjustments on a year by year basis because something looked off one year. So why are we so tempted to do that with college football? I don't know. I'm not calling in the NSAA experts to go visit with the CFP folks to give them an idea of how it should look. That's for sure.
Yeah, good.
Let's do one more before we get to the break here. Question from Charles. He says Calvin Jones sticks out as one of my all-time favorites in Husker history. What about you?
And we got the very sad news yesterday that we lost former Husker running back and Central product Calvin Jones. That's what I think of him as, because I'm a Central like walking through those hallways and seeing the pictures and stuff like that. But just over the year, so I wasn't really around or aware of watching his career play out. But you just hear things and you're around people. One of the things that I always heard is basically what Charles said, is like, this guy was one of my favorites. Remember Calvin Jones? And I'd like, I guess, Mitch, why do you think that was? Why do you think that Calvin Jones was one of those guys that people really gravitated toward?
Well, he ran for a lot of yards. He had a unique style in the way that he ran. He was kind of a high knee running back. He was a little bit flamboyant. Like you see the clip, and we saw it in with the news this week of his untimely passing at age 54. Calvin would run into the back of the end zone after a touchdown, and he'd be gliding along the fence, and he'd strip off his helmet, and you see that highlight, and you immediately know that it's nothing. Even despite the in addition to like the grainy footage, you know that that's nothing that happened in the last 20 or 25 years in college football, because you would immediately be assessed all kinds of penalties for taking off your helmet like that. But yeah, I think of him too as part of that Central lineage, and he was right there during that time when Central was just sending backs every cycle, like every 3 to 4 years or less. There would be Keith Jones, Leotis Flowers. It was Calvin Jones, Amon Green. It kind of peaked with Amon Green, but there were others going on to the Grixbys through the years of just great backs. It started with like Joe Arduna in the 1960s, but great backs that came from Central High School. It was like, I back you, and they all went on to most of them went on to play at Nebraska. So he was right in the middle of that. He was one of the signature guys in that time. He was part of the the Weeback tandem with Derek Jones and Derek Brown, sorry. And of course, he had the 294-yard game at Kansas in 1991, which stood as the record for most yardage in a single game until Roy Halou broke it 15 years ago. So that's what he's got a place. He got a place definitely among the greats at Nebraska.
All right, let's take a break. We have more questions to get to from the mailbag when we return.
In this moment, though, we want to tell you about Game Time. The NFL playoffs, they're getting down to the nitty-gritty. The conference championship weekend is here. It's on the horizon. You want to go, or do you want to see any live sporting event in the upcoming days and weeks? There's nothing like it. It's an unmatched experience, and Game Time can help elevate your opportunity to be in the stadium. Check out GameTime's new feature called GameTime Picks. You get tickets with ease to the events that you want to see. GameTime Picks filters out the fluff to show you incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of offers. I've used GameTime. It's great. Give it a shot. Browsing through the deals is a breeze. I love that it lets me see the seats, the views from the seat before I check out. The app, it shows you the total upfront cost with no surprise fees. There's nothing worse than seeing a price and then finding out that it's actually 30% more than that when you get to checkout. GameTime takes that out of the equation. You got the on-time ticket delivery, lowest price guarantee, complete peace of mind with GameTime. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, download the GameTime app. Terms apply. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Nebraska podcast, Mailbag Friday edition. I am Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone is with me. Connor's fighting some sickness. He's battling through. You can hear it in his voice. Maybe you can hear it in my voice too. I don't know. It's going through my house right now, but I feel like I'm teetering on the edge of staying healthy and upright.
It's all happening right now. Everybody's got it. I think there's a bunch of people who are out from work and stuff like that. So find your way, find your way through the end of January, because the weather looks good coming up in the, I don't know where people are located listening to this. Maybe, Vincent Napa is probably listening. He's like, what are you talking about? The weather's always good out here. So, but we're looking at like 40s and 50s next week around here. That sounds great to me.
I feel like they've been saying that all week. Like they've been telling us that it was going to get warmer in eastern Nebraska here at the end of the week or in the middle of the week. And then it just keeps getting pushed back. And every morning I go outside and it's 9 degrees.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, 9 is better than -9, I guess. Maybe we should look at the bright side that way.
We could have that. All right, let's get back to the mailbag questions from Scott on email. He starts his message with a very dramatic November 2001. Undefeated Nebraska goes into Boulder on Black Friday and gets molly-whopped. The beatdown is the impetus for 20-plus years of Cornhusker pain and irrelevancy. If the 12-team playoff had existed in 2001, 11-1 Nebraska simply would have sat out championship weekend, which it did anyway, rest its starters, and prepare for the first-round playoff matchup, having dropped from a 1 seed or a 2 into the 5 or 6 slot. Pain would not have then followed for the next 25 years. Am I right?
Okay. All right. So I hadn't really thought about it now, what was so painful about the end of the 2001 season wasn't getting blasted by Miami in the national. I mean, that was obviously a big part of it. But like the loss to Colorado itself was so
humiliating.
Big. Like it was so humiliating. Like it was just at the forefront of everyone's thoughts for a really long time. And obviously Nebraska followed that up by ending up somehow in the national championship game and then getting smacked around by Miami. But it wasn't that. I don't think that people were like, well, now we got blasted by Miami and now we're just irrelevant for the next, no, it's still the Colorado game. That game still happens, right?
The two consecutive losses to end that season. I mean, I get where Scott's coming from. I also understand what you're saying, and I think I lean toward agreeing with you. The 2 losses to end that season, both in blowout fashion, they definitely took some of the shine off of the Nebraska football program. And you went into 2002, and you lost the Heisman winner after the 0-1 season, also, in Eric Crouch, which was a factor in why Nebraska struggled in 2002. 7-7, which was shockingly disastrous in 2002. I think that was somewhat a result of how the 0-1 season ended, but more about the Colorado game than it was the Miami game. If Nebraska was not feeling good about itself coming out of Boulder that year, and if it had fallen into a slot like in the 5-12 game or the 6-11 game and had a home game at Memorial Stadium to start the playoff, which we're just inserting 2024 into 0-1, Yeah, I mean, maybe that situation kind of helps with it, and you get a win, and then you start to feel better, and like the off season after 0-1 goes a little differently. I mean, eventually you're going to meet a team, maybe not Miami, but you're going to meet a team in that bracket that ends it for Nebraska, but it probably doesn't have the same kind of just like punch in the face feel around the program if
Yeah.
you're able to get up off the mat more quickly after
Maybe.
the CU game.
Well, like if you game it out that way, so Nebraska's the 5, they play like the 12. Let's say they win, whoever that would have been. I'm looking at the rankings going into conference or coming out of
Deep
conference
on this.
championship week. So like LSU was exactly rated 12th. That was 3-loss LSU. Stanford 2 losses, Oklahoma had 2 losses at that point. So like you're playing somebody in that range. Let's say you win, and then you're playing somebody like Florida or hell, even Colorado again, like something like that in the next
twist
before you eventually do have to meet Miami. Like you're gonna have to run into Miami.
There was only one Miami that year, and
Yeah.
it was that Miami was totally dominant in like 95 Nebraska fashion that year. So that's the team that you had to avoid if you wanted to, if you wanted to not be embarrassed to go into the offseason. So I don't know. Maybe there's a psychological difference that could have impacted the future. We'll never know.
The Colorado game still heavy on people's hearts. All these years
we're
later.
getting questions 25 years later, almost 24 years later about that thing. So
all right,
it mattered a lot.
Several more questions here. Let's get to a couple more in this segment. Here is John. Does Nebraska have a virtual reality training program? I just saw that Jaden Daniels has been watching blitzes come at him at 1.75 speed since his LSU days.
Well, I mean, VR is out there, and Nebraska absolutely has access to VR training. I mean, my 14-year-old son has access to VR training with his baseball swing and the Win Reality stuff that college programs do. You can do it for kids that aren't even in high school. And I know that's probably not what John's talking about, but yeah, Nebraska has the walkthrough room at the new Osborne complex. And in that room, you can go in and actually run plays with a giant screen that simulates an offense or a defense on the other side. I don't know if it's exactly what Jaden Daniels is using with the Washington Commanders, but I think the technology is not an issue. Like Nebraska has access to all of the stuff that he would have, especially if you go back to his LSU days.
Yeah, if there's a question about like what the top technology is and does Nebraska have it, usually the answer is yes, or it won't be that long before they do if they feel like they're missing out on something.
Yeah, I don't think they're missing out on too much. I like the idea though of having blitzes come at you like almost twice as fast as happens in the game, because then obviously it looks slower when you're out there on the field.
It's like putting the donut on your bat or something like that.
Yeah.
Here's Ted. Hi guys, love the show. Seems like NIL will be changing post revenue sharing with deals over $600 needing to go through a clearinghouse. Much different than current roster value deals in the hundreds of thousands of dollars and more. What will 1890 do with the $10 million or whatever the number is that they are paying athletes? Can that be added to the revenue sharing funds?
Yeah, they could contribute it to the university, but the university with rev share gets 20 million. It's to pay athletes. Like that's it. You can't add. They can't say,
right,
well, we're going to add 10 more million. And Nebraska's already accounted in its budget for where that 20 million is going to come from. So it wouldn't really ease much of anything if the money that goes to 1890 is for 1890. Like the contributors who give that are giving it for NIL. Here's the thing to know, that provision that is supposedly limiting players from receiving NIL opportunities of more than $600 without it going through some kind of clearinghouse or red tape is not likely to stick. Like look at everything that's tried to limit opportunities for athletes in recent years and what the courts have had to say about it. They've thrown it out immediately. So I don't expect that we're ever going to be in a place where you're going to see a quarterback's NIL earnings go from $2 million to $600 overnight because of the clearinghouse. Like it's a fantasy and is unlikely to ever be part of the actual formula.
I would imagine the NIL collectives at that level will continue to operate, just kind of as they are.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way it looks to me at the moment. All right, let's take a time out here. We have a couple questions left that we have to get to on the other side on a Friday in the Locked On Nebraska podcast. All right, here we go. Connor Happer, Mitch Sherman with you for segment number 3 here on a Friday. Thanks for being with us. And you can get your mailbag questions in for any week at any time. So email us, lockedonneb@gmail.com. You can tweet at us, fire a DM, whatever you want to do. Send a carrier pigeon. It's all up to you. All right, let's get back to the questions here from Vincent Napa. Wow, I mentioned him earlier. Okay. I would like to follow up on something you addressed in your Tuesday podcast when you revisited Nebraska's 4-point loss to Ohio State. Since Nebraska finished 7-6, I think it showed how much they underachieved. Nebraska showed that on a given day, it could compete with, if not beat, upper tier teams like Ohio State and Penn State. However, they also show that they're just as likely to play poorly and lose to a bottom of the Big Ten team. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think teams around the country have shown that they can that they're going to be volatile. Look at I don't want to always go back to Northern Illinois beating Notre Dame, but that's one of the examples in this season, and you can find others where a team rises up and does more than just what Nebraska did in playing close against an Ohio State. Like those teams are teams that are even below what you would think of with Nebraska, but much below in resources, go and win games against national championship contenders. So much like you see in other sports, again, this is another example of where I think we hold college football to an expectation that's different from every other sport that we consume as sports fans. Like if the LA Dodgers lose to the worst team in Major League Baseball on a Tuesday in June, like nobody gives it a second thought. I understand football's different, but if the best team in the NFL plays a close game against a bottom feeder on a Sunday in November, like that's just the way the game goes. We have to start looking at college football that way too. So I'll ask you this, Connor, because this is, I think, the gist of Vince's question. Did Nebraska underachieve in 2024?
Yeah, I think they did. I think they could have got more wins out of the roster that they had, and they could have got more whatever out of the talent that they had. Absolutely. Yeah, I think they underachieved. I don't think that they were, like you have to take a lot into account when you play an individual game, like you sort of said, Mitch. I mean, there's also what Ohio State was going through in that game as well. And they hit a completely different gear after they lost to Michigan. Like Nebraska didn't see that version of it, but you play the team that you play. Their offensive line was really beat up. Nebraska took a huge advantage of that in that game. So there was that piece of it too. But should Nebraska, probably have won more than they did this year? Should they have went more than 6-6 in the regular season? Yeah, I think it falls a little flat. Like I think they could have won a couple more, given what they had, but they didn't. And to your point, Mitch, it's kind of the way it goes.
I think talent-wise, that was an 8-win team, maybe a 9-win team. That is simple as that. And so you could say that Nebraska underachieved by 1 or 2. But the important thing to take into the offseason is that Nebraska did show progress, and progress in building a program often is not a straight line. It's incremental. You go up, you go down. So for Nebraska to go from 5 wins in 2023 to 7 wins in 2024, even if there was an element of underachieving in getting there, it's acceptable as long as you continue to build on it. That's the big, you can't take a step back in year 3. You've got to go go out and exceed what you did in year 2 for Matt Rule. So I choose to look at it more in a forward way than saying, all right, let's look back at 2024. And no, I mean, let's look at 2025 and say, what can Nebraska do to build on what it did last season?
All right, one final question here from Marcus, who emailed the show. And throwing a prediction back in our face from our ill-fated prediction show. You guys famously both predicted that Nebraska basketball would win its first NCAA tournament game this year. Do you have any regrets? Now, Marcus is not offering us a do-over or anything like that. He's just saying, do you have any regrets? Do you regret what you've done?
So, I made that prediction walking out of PBA after Nebraska beat UCLA just a few short weeks ago. It is since 0-5 and now heads to 18th ranked Wisconsin Sunday at noon, and we'll follow up by playing Illinois and Oregon, which are also ranked. So yeah, I don't still feel the same way about Fred Hoiberg's team in the 24-25 season. Nebraska's going to have to really pull a big reversal in the way that things have gone over the last few weeks in order to make the tournament, which is required in order to win a tournament game.
That's right.
But I'm not regretting it. We make these picks and sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. What about you? What about you and is there any hope?
I have regrets. I think I got swept up in it a little bit. I didn't expect them to lose 5 in a row. And so the truth is obviously always located somewhere in the middle. But I definitely got swept up in it a little bit. The way that they were defending, what Bryce Williams was doing from an efficiency standpoint, and now like the rubber kind of met the road a little bit, and we're seeing a lot of what was carrying Nebraska just not showing up anymore. I think, Bryce is a little bit passive, more passive than you need him to be. The defense does not have the same teeth to it. They lack a lot, right? So like they were getting the most out of it before, and now they're not, and you're seeing the effects of that. Their margin for error is really thin. So yeah, I have some regrets. I think I got swept up in it a little bit.
I had concerns at the beginning of the year, and you go back to long before we made these picks. I had concerns about this being a 2-man team with Gary and Williams, and then everything else just kind of not fitting into place around them in the way that Hoiberg needed. And to his credit, they did a great job coming out of Hawaii and playing a few games early this year, late last year, where it looked like they had found a formula, and you saw players fitting into roles. I mean, Connor Segan clearly had a role. You saw Wooster running the point well, and yeah, I would say I felt like, man, he's working some magic with this group, because I didn't see it in November, and now I'm seeing it. Well, here we go, careening toward February, and it's looking more like that team that I thought I saw off the bat back in November. And in addition to that, like you said, Williams is maybe not looking for his shot enough, and Gary, I think we saw in the last game, is almost looking for his shot too much. Like he's being overly aggressive, and I get his intent. Like he wants to put this team on his back, but he's not a good 3-point shooter, and they've got to find ways to avoid those kind of situations where Juwan is just throwing up threes.
Yeah, and the point guard thing is not
grasping.
Yeah, for sure. But I think the biggest thing for me is just the teeth of the defense is just not there like it was. Right. It's not there, and it needs to be. Like they have to defend really hard.
The opponent 3-point shooting over this 5-game losing streak is insanely bad for Nebraska, and the 3-point shooting by their opponents is very good. And I'd expect that's going to be a tough trend to break over the next week and a half.
All right, that's it for us. Thank you all for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. For your second listen, you could check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast, where Craig puts the Big Ten first. Find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.